Hello, everyone. Here we are in our fourth week of organizational behavior, and it's going very quickly. Before too long, you'll be finishing up this course. Today, what I want to do in just a short amount of time is recommend to you a very, very good book that won't be difficult to read, but will be very helpful. It's called Being the Boss: The Three Imperatives for Becoming a Great Leader. The authors are Linda Hill and Kent Lineback. Linda Hill, by the way, if you check her out on TED Talks, she has a marvelous TED Talk on creativity in the workplace. The three imperatives that the two of them talk about, especially Linda, are the kinds of things. Although it talks about being a great leader, it really has to do with managing, because the three imperatives are: learn to manage yourself, learn to manage your network, and learn to manage your team. It's a great book full of lots of good stuff, and I just want to point out a couple of things today. And one of them has to do with the corporate culture, or the culture that you create in the environment where you're leading or managing. And one of the things that on page 172 of the book, it says, culture is crucial to the trust that links team members because it defines what they expect of each other. Let me say that again. Culture is crucial to the trust that links team members because it defines what they expect of each other. And she goes on to say that trust is counting on someone to do the right thing. Trust is counting on someone to do the right thing. And culture defines the right thing within a group. So you can see how important culture is. If you build a culture where honesty and integrity are important, then that's what people will how they will respond. If you build a culture where getting ahead determines is determined by how well you can fudge the facts, then that's the kind of environment that you'll create, and people will do that in order to get ahead. So the culture defines the right thing, and that's important to understand. This goes to ethics, and you will be having a course on ethics. You, in your reading this week, will be talking or reading about decision making, and one of the things that Linda Hill talks about in her book on Being the Boss is there are four critical elements of culture needed to create and sustain a team. And that has to do with the way that you identify the roles, the individual roles, uh, how the work gets done, who does what, how team members work together, and about progress. And in that is how the team makes decisions, because you're going to be looking at decision making. And one of the things that is important there are several things that she asks in the book about decision making. And one of the interesting questions that she asks is, are decision rights made clear? And what she means by decision rights is, do people understand who makes what decisions? In other words, when there is a particular decision that has to be made, do the people understand who is responsible for that decision? Is it a group decision? Is it a decision that comes from higher up? Is it the manager's decision? So being clear about decision rights, who has the right to make those decisions? And then the other question that she asks, do you involve others when you make decisions? And there are times when a decision has to be made unilaterally. There are times when it's important to include the whole group. I remember a case study that I read a few years ago about World War II unit, and this particular unit was assigned the task of going in and rescuing soldiers that had been wounded in action, and they had to go in and rescue those victims. And this particular unit had a very high success rate of being able to go in and um, get the people out that they needed to get out. And as the unit, they began to study why this particular unit had such great success. And what they discovered was, first of all, when they were talking about, when they were in the planning stages of how they would do a rescue mission, how they would do a mission, everybody in the unit, no matter what their rank, uh, con- could contribute to ideas, and they could talk about, they make suggestions, and they would debate. And it was a very democratic process in coming up with the particular plan of how to carry out the mission. Once the plan was agreed upon, then the second part of their success was the fact that they then followed the lines of authority established in the military to carry out that mission. In other words, once the decision was made, then there was no more debate. The person in charge was the person in charge, and you obeyed the orders that you were given. And that particular unit had more success than others because of that style of making decisions. Everybody involved in suggestions, trying to figure out how to do this, but once it was agreed upon, then there was no more debate, no backtalk, no disobeying. You followed, you did what you ordered to do, and you carried out the work that you were supposed to do. Was a very successful group. And so making decisions is important in terms of getting people to be on board, to be enthusiastic, to carry out. There are times when a manager has to say, this is what you need to do, but there are many times when you can work with your team to develop the course of action. The textbook talks about the decision making process. Be sure and pay attention to that. The next thing you're going to read about is conflict management. No matter how well you manage your team, you will have at some point conflict. Humans, um, because of our nature, can't avoid rubbing each other the wrong way at some times. Sometimes um, conflict can be a clash of ideas, and that can be good if it's managed properly, if it's not taken personally. When there's two different ideas or three different ideas, that is a conflict, but that is not necessarily negative because that keeps you sharp. It keeps you from falling into groupthink. But then there's also the conflict that we have. Personalities get involved as things are taken personally, and that conflict is a little messy. So, learning how to deal with that kind of conflict, getting to dealing with the problem and not personalities, not seeing people as the problem, but identifying the problem and then figuring out how do we address this problem? What are the ways that we can address it? Sometimes conflict is such that some people simply have to be let go. That is not always the case. As long as the manager can maintain an objective as possible position and not take things personally, and work out the try to work out according to some of the things that are suggested there in the textbook. That I hate conflict. I don't do well with conflict, that kind of conflict. And so I would recommend any of you who have difficulty, um, get somebody to coach you on it. Find a good textbook that helps you work through the strategies of conflict management, and because it will come up. It will come up. And the only way to deal with conflict is to face it. I've lived in a culture that shoved things under the carpet so that you move people around so that you didn't have to deal with conflict, and it always comes back three times worse than if it had been dealt with directly. So get into the habit of thinking about, how do I face this conflict? If there's conflict of ideas, how are you going to manage that? If it's a conflict of personalities or the way that things are done in the job, how are you going to deal with that? Um, Conflict is the way that we grow. We have to have conflict in order to grow. How we manage that conflict is determined by our maturity level. Anyway, I want to recommend this book on being the boss by Linda Hill and Kent Lineback. I hope you will take a look at it. It's very good. And then read carefully through the chapter on conflict management. Have fun. I look forward to reading your research papers. And until next week.